Good morning, everyone. We are starting a new unit today. The unit will be Understanding Rhetoric, and it will last about 6 weeks. If you are not in class, just know that each of you should receive a new syllabus for the unit, along with a resource guide and additional papers, just like we did for unit number 1. In class, for our academic note time, we're doing 2 things. The first thing we will do is actually go to the Career Center, where we will print a hard copy of your essay and attach a new printed rubric to the essay. So if you are not with us, make sure that you have printed your essay when you return to class. I'm still going on whether or not you followed the deadline of Saturday as to whether or not it is on time. But for me to start adding comments, I will do that on a first come, first served basis, depending on when you give me your hard copy. The other thing, once we finish that, and we're coming back to class, and in our academic note papers, I want each of you to think about your writing journey for this observation essay. So I'm going to have you write a couple of paragraphs in your academic notes, because these will be used later on when you work on your English 1010 page for your ePortfolio for each of the major papers. So think about your writing journey. What did you discover about yourself through this observation paper as a writer? And then also discuss in the second paragraphs what you feel are the strengths and weaknesses of your essay. So again, that response remains in your academic notes. Then again, you'll notice we are just going to be distributing all of the resources for Unit 2 in class. So make sure you check with me on Wednesday or before to get these resources. So here's a list of them. So my first thing I'm actually doing in class is having each of the students define what they think the word rhetoric means. Oftentimes students will know that word, or they may have heard of the word rhetorical, but the noun form of rhetoric, what do you think it means? And it's interesting that the majority of students, even though I assume most English teachers have covered it somewhere in their high school career, it doesn't set with them. I know that it will with you by the time you're through with this unit. So anyway, I'm having them just write on an index card what they think the definition is, and we're going to read them just to get a feel for what other people think that the word rhetoric is all about. Once we do that, we're actually going to look at the definition of rhetoric. And Plato, a philosopher from a long time ago, he said rhetoric is the art of winning the soul by discourse. Francis Bacon, from a couple hundred years ago, rhetoric is the application of reason to imagination for the better moving of the will. Salt Lake Community College a couple years did a workshop for the teachers, and I know the English department chair put on the board for us anything that a writer can do to get his or her purpose to work for an intended audience. And I was caught up in that definition. I thought it was too general in words, so I didn't like it until I actually started thinking about what he was saying. So anyway, for you to understand more about rhetoric, I'm dividing the class into 4 groups, and each of them will take a different article that has been written by one of the English professors on SLIC's campus, and they're just going to divide up, read the article, and come up with some new knowledge of rhetoric. So once they've done that, then we're going to have each student go back to their definition and add a couple of words that they feel would make their definition work for them. To illustrate the concept of rhetoric, so here's this definition by SLIC. Anything a communicator or writer does in an attempt to achieve his or her purpose with his or her intended audience or a reader. I want to illustrate it from a movie that's been around for a while. I'm sure most of you have seen it on Netflix or something. But anyway, the movie is called Groundhog Day. And the movie is, you're going to watch two clips. The first one is at the beginning, where this reporter who's been sent to cover Groundhog Day in Pennsylvania goes there along with another reporter and a film writer. Anyway, he's trying to, he falls for this other reporter. And in the movie, he tries and tries to win her over. So we're going to watch these first, or two clips. The first one is from early in the movie. The second one is later in the movie, to see what he does to seduce her into liking him. So think about some of the anything techniques that Phil Connor does to win this lady over. This slide reminds us that some of our great writings in American history and some of the people we remember as we think about greatness in our country, we remember them because of the language they used in order to get something down or something done. So they understood how to use rhetoric effectively for an intended audience. So pause the video and look at some examples. One of the most important parts of rhetoric is understanding the relationship of these four elements. If I want to persuade somebody to believe what I want them to believe, I need to know what my talents are as an author or a speaker, who my reader is or my intended audience, and what they might want. I have to solidify what my purpose is, and finally, select some different strategies that would work in persuading something of my viewpoint. So for example, let's just look at this everyday situation. Pretend that you spend a little bit of time last weekend studying, but mostly party hopping and celebrating because your football team won the championship. So as you talk about your weekend, think about how your conversation of what went on would be different depending on these three potential audiences: your best friend, your grandmother, your supervisor at work. All three of them would require you to think and understand what to say and what not to say in order to let those people believe you are a credible, good person. Sometimes the rhetoric that people use, people make bad decisions. If you look here I've got a couple of bad and then good. I'm not going to take time on this video to explain them, but LeBron James, about 10 years ago, was part of a 1-hour documentary on his life on ESPN, where he's told the country where he was going to go for his first contract when he broke away from the Cleveland Cavaliers. It ended up as a horrible situation for him. The fans were mad, burning his jerseys in the street. The next one is Donald Trump. A lot of people say that he lost the election because of his inability to understand his target audience with tweets. Other people would say he methodically tweeted what he said he knew what he was doing all along. So I'm not getting into a debate about what that was, but people definitely have an opinion of whether or not his tweets were productive or counterproductive. Of course, in Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, it's known as one of the great speeches of all time. And so the good of the message there, we still talk about it over 50 years after he gave that speech. And Abraham Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address, interesting, 3 paragraphs long, but we know more about the Gettysburg Address than we do much of what happened in Gettysburg, how many soldiers died, who the other speakers were when they dedicated the memorial for Gettysburg. We don't remember that, but we remember those 3 paragraphs because of the power and choices that Abraham Lincoln made. So here is just kind of a statistic that shows what people thought of Donald Trump at different phases from 2016 to 2020. You can see the tweets became more polarized longer into his presidency. So in your extra resources, there's a place in a handout where you're taking notes today called Rhetorical Toolbox. And there's also a list of tools that are quite a few pages long of choices. We will get into those. If you took AP last year, you spent the entire year learning about these choices. We are using it as a resource, so I expect you to go back to that list all the time in the next six weeks, and we'll talk about different tools that writers use to get their messages across. So very quickly, one of the tools is, what form do we choose to write something in? Another one, how do we choose to say what it is we want to do? That's with style. Another one is specific details of different types of tools that's out there. Again, that's the list of like several pages in your resource booklet. So in your research extra papers, you have a piece of paper that looks like this. We are actually going to fill this out in class. You will need to make sure that you get the notes from another student, because as we fill this out, it's going to give you a good overview of what rhetoric is all about. Finally, for your homework assignment, I'm going to have I included the actual speech in your resource booklet, and I've also included a link to the actual speech. So about 7-8 years ago, David McCullough Jr., who is the son of the famous David McCullough, who's won Pulitzer Prizes for books he's written about famous American leaders over the years. Anyway, the son is the chair of the English department at a prestigious school back east, and he was asked a few years back to give a graduation speech to the school. It was done out on the football field, and he wrote the speech and delivered it to the students and the parents that day. It lasts about 12 minutes, so you're going to go to this link and watch it. And then your homework will be to create, your document will have 4 subtopics on it: speaker, listener, purpose, and strategy. So each of those is going to turn into a paragraph where you're going to talk about what the speaker does effectively to get the message across, come up with an angle, and develop it with concrete details. Then you're going to think about who the intended audience is. And of course, for a graduation speech, you're going to have everyone in the audience, but most specifically the graduates themselves. So look at what they might expect from a graduation speech when they're out on a football field in the sun, and what they expect, and whether or not the writer addressed what the listeners would want to hear. The third one is that it's pretty obvious once you listen to the whole speech what David McCullough Jr.'s purpose was in the essay. You're going to talk about what that purpose is and support it with evidence. And then finally, what are some of the specific tools that he used to get his speech across? If you can, use the resource booklet with the extra terminologies and add that into your answer. It will be kind of the first step of learning how to discuss rhetoric effectively using the language or the tools that are used to talk about writing or speaking by implementing some of those terms. So that's your assignment. Enjoy the speech. It's really good. Thank you. We'll see you on Wednesday.